Yep.
Welcome everybody to this second session of the second day. The speaker of this session is Samuel Kasterberg. And Samuel is a Microsoft Premier Field Engineer who is located in Sweden. More and more it is common to see install BizTalk Server environments in Azure, as especially production environments require high availability. Today Samuel gives some guidance on HI related topics like network configuration, load balancing and alternatives for clustering SQL Server. So over to you, Samuel.
Thank you, Lex. So I work as Premier Field Engineer at Microsoft and work with customers that have unified support and Premier support. So today we're talking about setting up highly available BizTalk Server environments in Azure. So what can you expect of this session? We will focus on BizTalk Server 2020. We are not taking any consideration at all on moving to Azure Integration Services. Of course, it's something that we would like you to do, but it's something that takes time. It's not part of this session. We're going to look at things that are different or specific to Azure. It will not be a cookbook. We have 30 minutes, so it's at a high level, but a good guide to what to think about. We will disregard some things that are natural to have when setting up BizTalk environments, but since they are the same, we're not talking about them at this time. So when you're setting up a BizTalk Server environment, you have a lot of considerations. And when it comes to Azure, just as on premises, you have a set of rules on how your environment works, requirements on you from your organization on what kind of information or policies to adhere to. You have a set of products that you will be working with. You will be working, of course, with Windows. You have BizTalk Server, SQL Server, MSDTC, MSMQ, and IIS. And for those, you need to take into account for the environment to be up and running, highly available. You have things to think about for them. To have highly available environments, that involves generally to have some kind of clustering, and in some situations you need shared storage. And for the networking, if you look at the networking in Azure, it's slightly different from what you have on premises. And you need to route the traffic in the right way, and for that you will be needing to have load balancer configured. And you have to allow traffic to move from certain machines to others, and for that you will be using network security groups. And if you have exposed services as HTTP endpoints, you will need to have an application gateway up and running to route the traffic between or to the different BizTalk servers that you have. Also, you have provisioning automation. You will to think of. You create the resources in some way, and it could be ARM templates or scripting with like PowerShell. And for that, you sort of need to know how your organization takes care of that. So that is definitely something to ask. I've seen a couple of times with customers when the BizTalk team haven't asked the owners of the subscriptions how they actually want the provisioning to be delivered, and then the projects get delayed for that reason. When it comes to performance, as always, you have some kind of expectations and need to measure what your current performance is and what you want to reach. And for Azure, you have to think about resource sizing. More on that later. So if you look at governance, your organization have a set of policies, a set of rules on how your resources will work in Azure, and that could be who's the owner of things, who is allowed to do things. So that is something that you really need to discuss that with the owners of or administrators of your Azure subscriptions. So, and you will have a lot of resources, virtual machines and so on, and you place them in subscriptions and in resource groups. And subscriptions, it differs a little bit from customer to customer how you want to organize it. Some customers have one subscription for everything. Some others have subscriptions for dev environment, another for test, one for QA, and one for production. So that is check how that works. And from your perspective, you might have all the rights in the development environment, but no rights in production. So that is something that you have to check what can you do or not. So you have to look at when you organize your resources. Do you want to have all the machines in the same resource group, or do you want to distribute, like I want the BizTalk servers on one resource group and my SQLs on another? So that's the kind of things you need to think about. And of course, who will be the owner of the resources, and that differs a lot from customer to customer. And you will probably tag your resources to identify, like, this is a development environment, or this is a production environment, or this is a part of a certain project or so. And that can be used both to identify environments and also for cost distribution. So if we look at cost management, that is definitely something that you need to think about, because when you work in Azure, you will get a bill at the end of the month, and you need to distribute that. It's not that you don't have that on premises, but it's more like, here comes the bill, than when you're working on premises. Then you have licensing. You have different alternatives, and that could differ between different products. Will you bring your own license, or will you pay as you go? So that depends a little bit on what kind of enterprise agreement you eventually have. Another thing to think about when it comes to cost management is reservation. So if you know that, okay, I'm creating a BizTalk environment and I will have it for 3 years. If you reserve it for 3 years ahead, you will get a lot cheaper bill than if you're going with pay as you go. So that's something to think about. So, and as we discussed, resource provisioning, what rights do you have in the different subscriptions, and what can you do or not do? When it comes to security, you need your accounts, you need your groups, and access to Active Directory. How is your environment going to reach your domain controllers? Do you have one domain controller in Azure that you can reach easily, or how do you need to configure your network so you get that, because you need it for your BizTalk environment? And of course, the networking security for access for servers. So you need to think, okay, how can BizTalk access the different resources? If you have like folders in on premises, how do you reach them? Or how do you reach some database server if we're talking to a SQL server that is on another network than the one we're working with? So it's something you have to communicate with your infrastructure staff at your organization. And on the other way, how can other services, if we're exposing HTTP resources on our BizTalk server, how will those servers reach my BizTalk servers? So if we look a little bit on the product side, so for SQL Server, it's only IIS that is supported, and that's because it's the only version of SQL that supports distributed transactions. And there you have also, you can decide if you want to bring your own license or you want to pay as you go. Do you want to have your backups to blob storage with one of the feature packs for BizTalk Server 2016, which was introduced that we can take the backups to blob storage. And that's something to consider. In Azure, it's cheaper with blob storage than if you're using the file. So it could be definitely be an alternative. When it comes to high availability, you have for SQL, you have availability groups that owns their own storage, and you have failover cluster instance. And for that, you need shared storage, and we look at the alternatives later on. You have MSMQ if you're using that. You need storage shared storage for that, and storage spaces direct is the solution you have at the moment for that. If we look at BizTalk Server, we have the licensing question as always. Do you bring your own license or do you pay as you go? And for that, you have you could even combine. So you have, let's say that we have normally 2 BizTalk servers, and then we have a couple that we provision, and the provision depending on the load that we have. Let's say that you have a huge load during Black Friday, then you could have them running a couple of weeks. For BizTalk Server, high availability, you will be clustering your single instance hosts that uses FTP and so on. Enterprises assume as a secret server, you must cluster it. And you can do that in the SQL environment if you if you have a dedicated environment. That could be for having availability for HTTP traffic into BizTalk servers, you will need to configure the application gateway to let that traffic in. For MSDTC, high availability, you will cluster it, and you will need to configure the load balancer. Generally, we recommend to use a fixed port, so you have less rules to configure in the load balancer. For that, you need shared storage, and the storage basis direct is the solution at the moment for that. So if we look at clustering, you have networking. You have to use the load balancer to route the traffic, and you have shared storage to think about. So we will look at the alternative solutions that you have that have at the moment a little bit different feature sets. So if we look at the load balancer, SKU matters. So you have the basic and standard to choose from for the load balancer. And if you choose to go with standard, it will mean that you will always need to have network security groups, and that the network cards that you choose are also in the standard queue. So that's something you need to take into account. Then if we look at the load balancer, you have a front end, and the front end is the address that your service have, and that could be SQL, MSDTC, and so on. So let's say that you have SQL with availability groups. This would be the address to the listener of the availability group. And then you have a backend pool, and the backend pool is the VMs and the addresses that you have for them. So that's something you configure there. And then you have to sort of decide which machine is the current that is the current owner of the service. And for that, you configure a health probe. And that's a port that the load balancer will sort of ping to check with, I think it's 5 seconds interval in default, and ping to decide which one is the current and route traffic to that machine. Then you have the load balancing rules. And the load balancing rules binds the front end and the back end. And there you have a port mapping. And you can only set one port at a time. And that's why it's good to have for MSDTC and enterprises so fixed ports. So all these services that you use, you will need to configure there. On the other end, on the cluster, you will need to set the probe port cluster parameter to tell the cluster that you have a port that the load balancer will ping to check the health of that. So it's a little bit to think about, but it's not that much. If we look at shared storage, you will need it for clustering. If you have failover cluster instance for SQL Server, MSDTC, and MSMQ, you need that. If you look at the alternatives, you have Storage Spaces Direct. That is a software-defined storage solution that uses SMB3, and it synchronizes and works so that you have a number of VMs that have 2 or more disks dedicated to the Storage Spaces Direct service. And you will create a disk area that you will present to the cluster, through the cluster, that can be used by the services. For MSDTC, it's only available for Windows 2019 and onwards. If we look at the other solutions that we have a premium file share that you can use for SQL Server. So that's the file share service that you have in Azure, but in the premium scale. So you can use that. And something that is in preview, but I think that will be very interesting, and the way we go forward probably, the Azure shared disk, where you will actually attach managed disks to multiple VMs, and the Windows cluster will lock for write to only the machine that is the owner of the service. And you have third-party tools like Sias Data Keeper also. When it comes to performance, here is something that you really need to think about. So the virtual machines comes in many different editions that are optimized for different kind of workloads. And size matters. So it matters for disk speed. It matters for of course, CPU and memory. So you have to think about how many cores do I need, how much memory, but also how much throughput. And when I have discussed with customer, I've basically never heard of anyone actually looking at, they only look at the cores and memory, but never think of that the different virtual machine sizes have different maximum throughput IOPS that they have. And remember licensing also. So with your when you have your BizTalk server, if you have your own license, you have a number of cores that you have paid for, and then you have to sort of match that with the virtual machine that you have. If you have pay as you go, you will it's included in the license for the machine. If we look at when it comes to disk speed and size, remember that size matters. So when you look at storage, sometimes you see, okay, I need this number of gigabytes. Eventually, you need to sort of oversize them to actually get a higher number of IOPS to get. So that is so both the disk size and the size of the VM affects how much IOPS you actually can reach. And my recommendation is to measure this. You have tools like the Disk SPD to measure the performance of disks, and you could create a baseline in your current environment and sort of compare that with if you create a set of machines in Azure and sort of have an iterative process to test, and so you actually get the IOPS that you actually want. So we have some resources. So you have a colleague of mine, Ryan Adams. He has written some good blog posts about setting up MSDTC clustered and SQL clustered in Azure, and a couple of videos also that are very good, so I recommend that. And then you have some information about the storage solutions and good information, the last one, to actually see how performance works when it comes to storage in Azure. So you can reach to me to my email address, samuelkasterberg@microsoft.com. And we have Lex. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, indeed. When you check the browser, there are a couple of questions. Maybe if they don't show up already, you might need to refresh the window. But there are indeed a couple of questions. Do you want me to read them out, or will you take them yourself?
Let me see. I see. You can do it. Okay, we have someone responding there. So is it possible to build a failover cluster? Yes, you can. Yes, the question was if you can have SSO master secret server on the same environment where you have availability groups. Yes, you can do that, and that's a quite common solution, I would say. MSDTC configuration, can you assist?
Yeah.
Yes, if you look at Ryan Adams, the link that I added to the presentation, it's exactly that. I can add the link directly to the response later after the session. What are the best practices to connect BizTalk Farm to VNet? Well, I would say it depends on. So the best practice is to connect to reach your on-premises resources. Depends completely on how your networking environment is set up. You will need to have some kind of connection. So some VPN or express route configure and the routing configured. So it depends a little bit on your organization how you do that. Did we have something more?
No, that's really it, right? Yeah, that's really it. I believe there are 4 questions altogether. Yeah, the best practices about VNet, the MCC configuration, clustered environments, the failover cluster more for SSO, and availability groups. Yeah, you took that one. Indeed, John answered the question which came from Andreas. Yeah,
thanks, John. Yeah.
Is there anything? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry, a couple more are coming in. Yeah, I'll push them through. Okay. Oh. There are 3 more questions coming in.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't see mention on always on for SQL. Yes, so I call it availability groups. So always on is a set of different higher availabilities. Failover clustering instance is actually a part of always on. So availability groups is what a lot of people call always on. So you have, so you can use that definitely. So that was.
Yeah, that was to Peter.
Is it possible to compile on-premises and cloud? And not that I know. I think you have a lot of latency there, so I don't think so. I haven't seen it done. So I wouldn't create the BizTalk environment with that setup. Have you compared performance of on-prem versus cloud VMs on similar spec? I have done some comparisons, and if you get the spec right, you should have the same performance. On the other hand, if you have, it depends a little bit on how much load you have on your environment. If it's very heavy, then it depends a little bit on how the BizTalk environment behaves, I would say, if you can get it or not. Cost-wise, it depends. So cost-wise, which is better, Azure or on-prem? There is a lot of things there to take into account. So it's more a business decision, I would say. So you have in Azure, you see how much it costs. When on-prem, it's usually just sort of more difficult to see, to get a picture of the cost of the exact BizTalk environment. But I haven't done any big comparisons there.
Yeah, the last one is note of the colleague.
Yeah, Niklas is, it is good to have enterprises so and MSDTC clustered in the same group as the cluster SQL resource. Yeah. So that's good. Thank you, Niklas. A good friend.
Indeed. And still a colleague, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are a couple of more questions in the pending section, but I'm afraid I have to stop the stream.
Yep. Okay. Thank you for today, and I respond the questions after the session then.
Okay, fantastic. Well, indeed, Samuel, thank you for being with us, and surely we will be in touch.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Cove.co